It was one of those warm afternoons when everything felt normal. The sky was clear, the sound of kids playing somewhere in the distance filled the air, and a soft breeze moved through the streets. A tall teenager wearing a gray hoodie and carrying a small plastic bag from the convenience store was walking home. He wasn't in a hurry. His earphones hung around his neck, and his mind was somewhere else, thinking about school, his upcoming basketball tryouts, and how good it felt to finally have a free weekend. He had lived in the same neighborhood for years. People there knew him as quiet and respectful, the kind of kid who helped carry groceries for older neighbors and stayed out of trouble. But that didn't stop strangers from seeing him differently sometimes. He knew that even though he never did anything wrong, people often made assumptions. He tried not to let it bother him. He just wanted to get home, eat his snacks, and relax. As he turned the corner onto a quieter street, a police cruiser slowly rolled past. He didn't think much of it at first. Police cars drove around often. But this one slowed down a little too much. He could feel eyes watching him. He glanced over and noticed two officers inside, one driving, one in the passenger seat, both staring. His stomach tightened a bit, but he looked down at the ground and kept walking, telling himself not to overthink it. The sound of tires stopped behind him. Then came the familiar voice that made his chest sink. "Hey, you there. Stop for a second." He froze. He turned around, trying to stay calm, even though his heart was beating fast. One of the officers stepped out of the car, adjusting his belt as he approached. "Where are you headed?" the officer asked. His tone was sharp, not friendly. "Home," the boy said quietly. "Home, huh? You live around here?" "Yes, sir. Just a few blocks away." "You got any ID on you?" He reached slowly into his pocket for his wallet. His hands were steady, but his mind raced. He had heard too many stories about people making sudden moves and getting into trouble. He showed them his student ID. The officer took it, glanced at it, and frowned slightly. "What are you doing out here?" the officer pressed. "I just went to the store," he said, holding up the bag with chips and a soda. The other officer got out of the car too, now standing closer. He looked the boy up and down as if searching for something wrong. "We got a call about someone suspicious walking around," he said. "You fit the description." The teen blinked. "Description?" "Dark hoodie. Walking near the park." Acting strange, he looked around. The street was empty. "I'm just walking home. Mind if we check your bag?" He hesitated. "It's just snacks," he said softly. But the first officer was already reaching for it. The boy instinctively pulled it back. "Sir, please." "Hey, don't resist," the officer snapped. The words hit him like a cold wave. He wasn't resisting, he was just scared. He tried to explain, but the officers started giving quick commands. "Hands where we can see them. Step over here." He did exactly what they said, his voice trembling. "I'm not doing anything wrong. I just came from the store." "Then you got nothing to worry about," one officer said, though his hand rested near his holster. People were starting to notice. A man across the street slowed his car. A woman peeked out her window. The boy's heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else. He remembered his mother's advice: stay calm, don't argue, don't make sudden moves. But inside he felt anger mixing with fear. One of the officers spoke into his radio. "We're checking a possible suspect on Willow Avenue. Male about 6 feet, dark clothing, uncooperative." Uncooperative. The word made him want to shout. But he swallowed the words. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was his mom calling. He wished more than anything that he could just answer. But the officer barked, "Don't move." He lifted his hands a little higher. "Can I please call my mom?" "No, not right now," the officer said, his tone firm. The phone buzzed again and again. The boy stood still, eyes down, fighting to keep tears away. He had done everything right. He had good grades, helped people, stayed out of trouble, yet here he was, being treated like a criminal on his own street. The second officer started walking around him, inspecting him like he was some kind of threat. "Empty your pockets," he ordered. The boy obeyed. He placed his phone, his wallet, and a few coins on the hood of the police car. The first officer glanced at them and muttered something under his breath. The teen caught a few words. "Doesn't look dangerous." But that didn't stop them from continuing. Then one of them noticed the boy's expression. "What's with that look? I don't understand what I did wrong." "Look, we got a job to do," the officer replied. "Someone reported a person acting suspicious. You're out here, so we're checking it out." Simple as that, but it wasn't simple, not for him. He could see the suspicion in their eyes, feel the tension in the air. No matter what he said, It wouldn't change the way they saw him. The first officer stepped closer. "Do you have anything illegal on you?" "No, sir." "Any weapons, drugs?" "No." "Then you won't mind if we search you?" He wanted to say no, that they had no right without reason, but fear kept him silent. He took a slow breath and nodded. "I don't have anything." As one officer patted him down, the other picked up his phone, which was still buzzing. "Someone's really trying to reach you," he said with a smirk. The officer looked at the screen. "Mom," he read out loud. "Want me to tell her you're busy?" The boy swallowed hard. "Please, can I just tell her I'm okay?" The officer hesitated for a moment, then answered the call himself. "Hello, ma'am. Your son's being detained for questioning." There was silence for a second. Then the officer's expression changed. The voice on the other end wasn't panicked, it was calm, controlled, and sharp. The officer's brows drew together. Yes, ma'am," he said. "We're just following up on a report." He paused, then his tone softened. "Badge number? Yes, I can give that to you." He glanced at his partner, who looked confused. The boy watched the exchange, not understanding what was happening but sensing something shift. When the officer hung up, he didn't say much. He just looked uncertain, as if he wasn't sure what to do next. The other officer asked, "What was that about?" She said she's on her way." The boy's heart jumped. His mom was coming. He didn't know how, but she always had a way of making things right. Still, he felt uneasy. The officers seemed less confident now, glancing down the road every few seconds. Minutes felt like hours. The boy stood quietly by the car, still shaken. He could see the flashing reflection of the patrol lights on the windows around them. The officers spoke quietly to each other, trying to decide what to do next. Then, from down the street, a black SUV appeared. It moved quickly but smoothly, pulling up beside the police car. The doors opened, and two people stepped out, both dressed in black suits. They didn't look like regular civilians. They showed something, badges maybe, and spoke in firm voices that carried authority. The boy didn't know what was going on, but the officers suddenly straightened up. One of the suited people walked toward the patrol car, saying something the boy couldn't hear. Then the back door of the SUV opened and a woman stepped out. The moment he saw her, his breath caught. It was his mother. She walked calmly, her eyes fixed on the officers. There was no yelling, no anger in her face, just quiet power. She wore a simple jacket, but something about her posture made everyone step back slightly. She stopped in front of them and looked at her son first, scanning him from head to toe. "Are you hurt?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No, ma'am." Then she turned to the officers. "Would either of you like to explain what exactly you're doing detaining my child?" The street went silent. Even the breeze seemed to stop. The officers exchanged nervous glances. One tried to speak, but she raised a hand. "Before you answer," she said, "I want your badge numbers. And I want to know which of you made the decision to approach him." The boy's eyes widened. He had never seen her like this. The officers started to stammer explanations about a call, a description, a misunderstanding. She listened without interrupting, but her eyes never left them. When they finished, she took a slow breath and said quietly, "You made a very big mistake." The boy didn't yet know how big that mistake was. He only knew that for the first time in his life, the people who had all the power a few minutes ago suddenly looked uncertain, like they weren't sure who they had just messed with. And deep down, he had a feeling that what came next would change everything. The officers stood stiff as if they didn't know what to do next. The woman's presence changed everything. She wasn't loud or rude, but the quiet strength in her voice made everyone listen. The neighbors, who had been watching from their windows, now stepped outside to see what was going on. Some held their phones, filming the moment. The woman didn't even glance at them. Her focus stayed only on her son and the two officers. One of the officers tried to speak first. "Ma'am, we received a call about a suspicious person in the area. She interrupted him softly but firmly. "You were just what? Harassing a child on his way home? Or profiling someone based on what he looks like?" The other officer shifted uncomfortably. "That's not what this is, ma'am. We were only doing our job." She stepped closer, not in a threatening way but with confidence. "Your job?" she repeated. "I've been in law enforcement longer than you've probably been wearing that uniform. I know exactly what your job is. And this isn't it." The boy stood quietly, still shaken, but he couldn't take his eyes off his mother. He had always known she worked for the government, though she never told him much. She said her job involved national work, and that sometimes she traveled for long stretches. But this was the first time he had seen her like this. Calm, direct, and completely in control. The officer who had taken his ID earlier looked pale now. "Ma'am, if I could just explain." "You'll have plenty of time to explain," she said. "But first I need your badge numbers." They hesitated, but under her stare they both read their numbers out loud. She typed them into her phone, then made a quick call. The conversation was brief. She said only a few words, clear and firm, and then hung up. Whatever she said must have mattered, because a few minutes later another black car appeared, followed by a marked police SUV. Out stepped a man in a suit and a woman wearing a department badge around her neck. The man spoke quietly to the officers, who quickly looked down as if scolded. Then the suited woman approached the boy's mother. They spoke privately for a few seconds. The boy couldn't hear what they said, but he noticed the subtle change in body language. The new arrivals weren't in charge here, his mother was. One of the officers finally said, "Ma'am, we didn't know who he was." She looked at him with disbelief. "You didn't have to know who he was. You only needed to see he was a kid walking home. That should have been enough." The man in the suit tried to smooth things over. "We'll handle this, Agent," he said respectfully. "We'll file a report and review the call logs." "See that you do," she replied. The crowd around them had grown. People were whispering, some shaking their heads, others recording. The tension that had filled the air earlier had turned into a strange quiet. No sirens, no shouting, just a heavy silence broken only by the sound of her calm voice. She turned to her son. "Go wait in the car," she said softly. "It's okay now." He nodded, still processing what was happening. As he walked to the SUV, one of the agents opened the door for him. Sitting inside, he watched through the window. His mother stayed behind, talking to the officers and the suited officials. He couldn't hear, but he could tell from the look on her face that she was making sure this wouldn't just be brushed aside. Inside the SUV, he sat quietly. His hands were shaking slightly, and he didn't know why. Maybe it was leftover fear, or maybe it was relief. He looked down at the snack bag still sitting in his lap, now crumpled. He thought about how fast everything had changed from a normal walk home to this. He thought about the moment when the officer grabbed his arm, about how powerless he'd felt. But now, watching his mother handle the situation with so much control, he felt something else. Pride. Outside, the conversation was wrapping up. The officers looked embarrassed, one rubbing the back of his neck. The man in the suit gave a few final words, then turned and left with them. The mother stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath before walking back to the car. When she got in, she closed the door gently and looked at her son. "You okay?" He nodded, though his eyes were still glassy. "Yeah," he said quietly. She turned toward him fully. "You did nothing wrong. Remember that." He looked down. "They didn't believe me." "I know," she said softly. "Sometimes people see what they want to see, not what's really in front of them. But that's their fault, not yours." He wanted to ask her 1,000 questions, how she showed up so fast, what she said to those officers, what exactly her job was, but he didn't. Instead, he just said, "Thank you." She smiled faintly. "You don't ever need to thank me for protecting you." They drove off quietly. The flashing lights behind them faded, replaced by the normal rhythm of the city again. The boy looked out the window, still thinking. At a red light, his mother glanced over. "I know you're angry," she said, "and you have every right to be, but don't let this make you bitter. Let it make you stronger." He didn't answer right away. He just nodded. Back home, the house felt different. The quiet was heavier. He went straight to his room and sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall. Everything that happened kept replaying in his head. The questions, the tone of the officers, the way people watched but said nothing. He thought about how his life could have changed in a few wrong seconds. His mother knocked softly on his door. "You can talk about it if you want." He looked up. "How did you know something was wrong?" Her expression softened. "I didn't. I just had a feeling. You didn't answer when I called, and then someone picked up your phone, an officer. I could tell something wasn't right." He frowned. "They said I fit a description, but I was just walking." "I know," she said. "That's what hurts the most. You shouldn't have to be careful just for existing." She sat beside him. For a long time, they didn't say anything. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, he asked, "Are they going to get in trouble?" "They'll be investigated," she said simply. "And their department will know exactly what happened." "I made sure of it," he nodded slowly. "You sounded different when you were talking to them." Her lips curved slightly. "That's because they needed to see who they were dealing with. I don't usually show that side at home." He managed a small smile. "What do you even do exactly?" She chuckled softly. "Let's just say my job is about making sure people follow the law, even the ones who think they're above it." For the first time since the incident, he smiled genuinely. "That's kind of cool." "It's not about being cool," she said. "It's about making sure people are treated fairly. That's why I do what I do." Later that evening, she received a call. She stepped into another room to take it, but her voice carried faintly through the hall. She spoke in short, professional sentences, confirming details, giving a report, making sure every step was documented. The boy stood by his door, listening quietly. It hit him then how much she had to deal with, how much she probably couldn't tell him. Yet when he needed her most, she was there. After she hung up, she came back and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You handled yourself well today," she said. "I know it was scary. I was really scared," he admitted. "But when I saw you get out of the car, it felt like everything stopped." She smiled softly. "That's what mothers do. We stop the world if we have to." They both laughed quietly. The tension in the room began to fade. The next day, things started returning to normal, or at least they tried to. But news of what had happened spread quickly through the neighborhood. A few people knocked on their door, offering support. Some even shared their own stories, times when they'd been treated unfairly. The boy realized he wasn't alone. His mother stayed calm through it all. She didn't talk much about the case, but he could tell she was following up behind the scenes. Every time the phone rang, she'd excuse herself, speak for a few minutes, then return looking more focused than before. By the weekend, the officers involved had been reassigned pending investigation. The boy's mother didn't celebrate it. She just nodded as if it was only the beginning of a longer fight. For him, though, it meant something bigger. He finally understood what kind of person his mother really was. Not just someone who worked in an office with classified files, but someone who stood for what was right, no matter who she was up against. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought about what she said. "Don't let this make you bitter. Let it make you stronger." He repeated those words in his mind until they felt like a promise. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. He'd never forget that day, or the way his mother's calm voice had turned fear into power. And deep down, he hoped the world would someday learn to see beyond the surface, just like she always did. The days after the incident felt different. The house was quieter, though nothing was actually wrong. The boy went through his normal routine: school, practice, chores. But everything carried a strange heaviness now. He noticed how people looked at him when he walked down the hallway at school. Some of them had seen the video that neighbors posted online. It had spread faster than he expected. At first, he didn't even know there was a video, but one of his classmates showed him on their phone. A clip of him standing by the police car, his hands raised, and his mother walking up like someone straight out of a movie. The caption read, "Cops target teen, regretted instantly." He didn't know whether to feel proud or embarrassed. Everyone was talking about it. Some called his mom a hero. Others just shook their heads about what happened. He wished it hadn't gone public at all. He wasn't looking for attention, he just wanted peace. That night at dinner, his mother noticed how quiet he was. "You're not eating much," she said softly. He shrugged. "I'm just tired." "People bothering you at school?" He hesitated. "Not really. Just a lot of questions," she sighed. "I figured that might happen." "I didn't tell anyone," he said quickly. "They just saw it online. Everyone keeps saying how brave you were. They're calling you an agent or something." She smiled slightly. "Well, they're not wrong." He looked up, curious. "So you really are one?" She set her fork down, thinking for a moment. "Yes, I work in federal security. That's why I travel sometimes and why I can't always tell you what I'm doing. It's not about secrecy, it's about safety." He nodded slowly. "So that's why those people showed up that day, the ones in the suits?" "Exactly. They were part of my team." He sat back, letting it sink in. It explained a lot. The calls she couldn't talk about, the strange hours, the training equipment he once saw in the garage. But knowing the truth didn't make him feel safer. It just reminded him how serious her world really was. She noticed his silence and reached across the table. I know this has been hard on you, but you handled yourself well. You stayed calm, and that's what kept it from getting worse. He nodded, trying to smile. I learned that from you. She chuckled softly. Maybe so. The next morning, she left early for work. He could tell from her look that she wasn't just heading to the office. She was probably meeting with higher-ups about the case. She had been careful not to discuss details, but he overheard her mention internal review and civil rights compliance. It sounded serious. At school, things only got stranger. A local news crew showed up outside the building, asking students if they knew him. Some teachers even gave him side glances, as if they didn't know whether to treat him like a victim or a celebrity. He tried to keep his head down and just get through the day. During lunch, one of his friends sat next to him. Man, your mom's a legend. The way she handled those cops, she didn't even raise her voice. He forced a small smile. Yeah, she's something else. But does it freak you out? Like knowing she's an agent and all? He thought about it. A little. But I'm proud of her. She just doesn't like people messing with her family. That afternoon, as he walked home, he noticed a familiar car parked near the corner, a dark sedan with tinted windows. For a second, his chest tightened, thinking it was more police. But when the window rolled down, he saw one of his mother's co-workers from that day. The man nodded politely. Hey there, he said. Just keeping an eye on things, the boy frowned. Why? Sometimes when an incident gets attention, not everyone reacts nicely. We just want to make sure you and your mom are safe. He didn't know what to say. The idea of needing protection because of something that happened right outside his own house made him uneasy. But he nodded and kept walking. When he got home, his mother was already there, standing by the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone. She looked up. How was school? Fine, but one of your co-workers was outside watching the street. She nodded. I asked them to. He raised an eyebrow. You think something's gonna happen? Probably not. But when a video like that goes public, it draws attention from all kinds of people, some supportive, some not. It's better to be cautious. He leaned against the counter. I didn't ask for any of this. I know you didn't, she said gently. But sometimes we don't get to choose the moment we're put in. We only get to choose how we handle it. Her words stayed with him that night. He kept thinking about how easily things could have gone wrong. One small misunderstanding could have changed everything, and if his mother hadn't shown up when she did, he wasn't sure what would have happened. A few days later, his mother called him into the living room. She was sitting with a man in a dark suit, the same one who had been at the scene that day. This is Director Hayes, she said. He's from the Internal Affairs Unit. He wants to talk to you. The man smiled politely. I just wanted to hear your side of what happened. Don't worry, you're not in trouble. The boy sat down carefully. I already told the police what happened. I know, the man said. But we're doing an independent review. We want to make sure everything was handled properly. He hesitated, then nodded. They stopped me when I was walking home. They said I looked suspicious. I didn't argue. I just did what they said. The man nodded thoughtfully, jotting down notes. And your mother arrived shortly after? Yes, she called my phone when one of them answered it. Then she came, the man smiled faintly. You're lucky to have her. I know, the boy said quietly. When the man left, his mother turned to him. You did great. You told the truth and stayed calm. He looked at her curiously. Will those officers lose their jobs? They'll be held accountable, she said. That's all that matters. The next weekend, their doorbell rang. It was one of their neighbors, an older woman who had filmed part of the incident. She brought a pie and said softly, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what you went through. No one should have to deal with that. The boy thanked her and his mother invited her in. They talked for a while, mostly about how things like this happened more often than people realized. The woman promised to share the video with a local awareness group, not for fame, but to help educate others. After she left, the mother sat quietly for a long moment. It's strange, she said. I've worked cases all over the country, trying to protect people. But when it happens to your own child, it hits differently. He nodded. Maybe this is why you do what you do. She looked at him and smiled softly. Maybe it is. In the following weeks, the attention slowly faded. The news moved on to other stories, and people stopped asking questions. Life began to settle again. But the boy had changed. He walked taller, spoke clearer, and no longer stayed quiet when he saw unfairness. Something in him had grown stronger. One afternoon, his teacher asked him to speak to the class about what he'd learned from the experience. At first, he didn't want to, but his mother encouraged him. "Sometimes telling your story helps someone else find courage," she said. Standing in front of the class, he took a deep breath and began. "I didn't want any of this to happen," he said honestly. "I just wanted to go home that day, but it taught me something important, that being calm can save your life, and that sometimes the people who protect us can make mistakes. We all have to do better." The room was silent when he finished. Even his teacher looked emotional. When he got home that day, his mother was waiting for him with a proud smile. "You did good," she said. "Really good," he grinned. "You saw the video?" "Of course," she said. "Someone sent it to me." "You handled it like a professional," he laughed. "Guess I learned from the best." That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The air was quiet again, peaceful the way it used to be. For the first time since that day, it felt like everything was finally returning to normal. But somewhere deep inside, they both knew things would never truly be the same. The experience had opened their eyes in a way nothing else could. The boy understood the world a little better now, its dangers, its unfairness, and its strength. And his mother, though she had seen much worse in her career, was reminded that sometimes the most important battles happen right outside your own front door. She reached over and placed her hand on his shoulder. "No matter what happens," she said softly, "always remember who you are. Don't let fear or anger change that." He nodded, watching the fading light. "I won't." And for the first time since that terrible afternoon, he believed it. He was no longer just the kid in the video. He was someone stronger, someone who had faced fear and learned the power of calm, truth, and courage. The mother stood beside her car, calm but clearly in control. Her sharp eyes moved from one officer to the other. She didn't raise her voice or make a scene. She didn't need to. The tone in her voice and the confidence in her body language said everything. The officers, who had been acting like they were in charge, suddenly looked unsure. She asked for their badge numbers in a quiet, steady tone. One of them hesitated, glancing at his partner as if unsure what to do. The teen, still shaken, stood a few steps behind her, clutching the strap of his backpack. He had never seen his mother like this before. At home, she was always gentle and easygoing. But right now, she looked like someone else, someone powerful. The officer mumbled his badge number and she repeated it out loud, making sure it was clear. Then she asked for the reason they had stopped her son. The taller officer tried to sound confident, explaining that they had received a report about a suspicious person matching her son's description. She tilted her head slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line. "A suspicious person?" she asked softly. "Walking home from a store in broad daylight?" The officer shifted on his feet. "Well, ma'am, he fit the description we were given." She stepped closer, her tone still calm but sharp. "And what exactly was that description?" The officers exchanged a quick look. They didn't have a clear answer. They hadn't even thought about what the report said word for word. It was clear now that they had acted on assumptions rather than facts. The mother took out a small black folder from her bag and flipped it open. Inside was her federal ID, the kind only high-level government employees carried. The gold lettering caught the sunlight as she held it up. "My name is Agent L," she said, stopping short before finishing her title. "And I work with the Federal Intelligence Division." The air seemed to change in that moment. The street that had been buzzing with murmurs from bystanders suddenly went silent. Even the officers froze, their confident posture replaced by visible discomfort. The taller one stepped back slightly. "I'm going to ask again," she said. "What reason did you have to stop and detain my son?" The shorter officer cleared his throat. We were just following procedure, ma'am." She nodded slowly. "Then let's talk about procedure, because from what I can see, several parts of it were ignored today." She pointed calmly to the officer's body camera. "You turned this on before the stop, right?" He nodded quickly. "Good," she replied. "Then I'll be requesting that footage for official review. You also informed him of his rights, correct?" The officer hesitated again. "Well, we hadn't reached that part yet." Her eyebrow lifted slightly. "You hadn't reached that part," she repeated softly, the way someone might repeat a line to make sure it sank in. You detained a minor, searched him without cause, and failed to read his rights. You're aware that's unlawful, correct? The officers' faces flushed red. They both knew they had no proper defense. By now, more neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk. Some were recording on their phones, but no one spoke. The scene had changed completely. The same officers who had been loud and commanding now stood silently, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. The mother turned to her son. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft again. He nodded, though his eyes were still wide. "I didn't do anything, Mom. I was just walking home." "I know," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to explain. I know exactly what happened." She turned back to the officers. "You two made a choice today," she said quietly. "You chose to act first and think later. That's dangerous, not only for my son, but for you too. Because what happens if that split-second decision leads to something that can't be undone?" One of the officers swallowed hard. The other shifted his weight, looking down at the ground. A new vehicle arrived, a black and white SUV with a supervisor's badge on the door. A senior officer stepped out, his expression tightening as soon as he saw her credentials. He approached carefully, his hands clasped in front of him. "Agent, I'm Sergeant Reed," he said respectfully. "I understand there's been some sort of misunderstanding here." She didn't nod or smile. "A misunderstanding," she repeated. "Your officers detained a minor with no probable cause. They escalated a simple walk home into a confrontation. You can call it a misunderstanding if you want, but from where I stand, it looks like bias." The sergeant nodded, his tone apologetic. "I understand completely. I'll take full responsibility for my officers' actions." "Please, if we could," she interrupted him gently but firmly. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to make sure this never happens again, to my son or anyone else's." She handed him a small card. "That's my office contact. I'll be expecting a full written report on this incident by tomorrow afternoon. Include the body cam footage, the dispatch call logs, and the report that started this supposed suspicious person alert." The sergeant took the card with both hands, nodding repeatedly. "Of course, Agent, we'll handle it immediately." The mother looked around at the watching crowd. "Thank you," she said quietly to no one in particular. Her son stood close beside her, still trying to process everything. The officers stepped back, embarrassed and silent. The mother opened the car door for her son and waited for him to get inside. Before she followed, she turned one last time toward the group. "Next time you stop someone," she said, "try seeing a human being first, not a threat." With that, she got in the car and they drove away slowly, leaving behind stunned faces and a heavy silence. As they turned onto a quieter street, her son finally spoke. "Mom," he said softly, "I didn't know you could do all that." She smiled faintly. "There's a lot about my job I can't talk about," she said. "But what matters is knowing how to stand up for yourself and when to let someone else stand up for you." He stared out the window, his mind replaying the entire scene. "They didn't even listen," he murmured. "No matter what I said, they just looked at me like I was lying." She nodded slowly. "That's why you have to stay calm, even when it's unfair. You can't control what they assume, but you can control how you respond. That's power too." He looked at her, realizing she wasn't just talking about that moment. She was teaching him something much deeper. When they reached home, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange and pink. The street felt quieter than usual. He walked inside, still feeling the mix of fear and relief swirling inside him. She followed, closing the door behind them. For a long moment, neither spoke. The tension was slowly melting, replaced by the comfort of being home. Finally, she walked over and hugged him tightly. "I know you're shaken," she said softly, "but you did everything right. You stayed calm. You didn't argue. You gave me time to get there." He hugged her back, not realizing how badly he had needed that moment. "I thought something bad was going to happen," he whispered. Her voice was firm but gentle. "That's exactly why I needed them to see me," she said. "People like them need to remember that not everyone fits the boxes they put us in. Sometimes they need to be reminded who's really watching." She smiled then, just a little, and I think today they learned that lesson. Later that night, she sat at the kitchen table typing on her laptop. Her face was calm, but her eyes were focused. She wasn't writing for revenge, she was documenting facts. Dates, times, badge numbers, everything she had witnessed. Her work required accuracy, and she wasn't about to let this incident fade without a record. Her son sat across from her, quiet, sipping hot chocolate. He kept glancing at her, trying to understand how she could stay so composed. "Aren't you angry?" he finally asked. She paused, then looked up at him. "Of course I'm angry," she said. "But anger doesn't solve things. Evidence does. Truth does." He nodded slowly, watching her fingers move across the keyboard. He realized that her strength wasn't about how loud she could be. It was about how smart and steady she stayed when it mattered most. By midnight, she closed the laptop and looked at him. "You get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow will take care of itself." He smiled faintly. "Okay, Mom." When he went to bed that night, he felt different. He wasn't just proud of his mother. He was inspired. She had shown him what power really looked like. It wasn't about badges or uniforms. It was about standing up for what's right with calm strength and unshakable dignity. The next morning started quietly. The teen woke up earlier than usual, the sunlight spilling across his room. For a moment, he just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything that had happened the day before. It still felt unreal, like something out of a movie. But the more he thought about it, the more real it became. He could still see the flashing lights, the look in the officer's eyes, the way his mother had arrived and turned the whole situation around with just her words. He remembered the silence that followed, the power in her calmness, and the way everyone seemed to realize they had crossed a line. As he sat up, he noticed his phone lighting up on the nightstand. There were a few messages from friends who had seen short clips of the incident online. Someone must have posted a video from the crowd. People were talking about it, about the woman who had shown up and made the officers freeze. Some called her the mystery agent. Others just said she was a brave mother who stood up for her son. He didn't respond to any of them. He didn't really know what to say. It wasn't something he wanted to turn into a story for social media. To him, it wasn't about going viral. It was about what that moment had meant, how close things had come to going wrong, and how his mother had protected him not just as a mom, but as someone who understood the system from the inside. When he went downstairs, he found her sitting at the kitchen table again, a cup of coffee beside her laptop. She looked calm, almost peaceful, but he knew her mind was already 3 steps ahead, thinking about what came next. "Morning," he said quietly. She looked up and smiled. "Morning, sweetheart. How are you feeling today?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "Still kind of weird about everything." "That's normal," she said, closing her laptop. "Yesterday was a lot, but you handled yourself better than most people would in that situation." He sat down across from her. "Did you have to do anything else about it?" "I sent in my report," she replied. "Now it's up to them to decide how they want to handle it. I also requested the body cam footage. Once I get it, I'll review it for any inconsistencies." He nodded slowly. "Are they going to get in trouble?" She sighed softly. "Maybe, but that's not really what I want. What matters to me is that they learn something from this, that next time they think twice before jumping to conclusions." He thought about that for a moment. "You always know exactly what to say," he said quietly. "Even when they were yelling, you didn't raise your voice once. You just made them listen." She smiled faintly. "That's something I learned a long time ago," she said. "Real strength isn't about shouting. It's about staying calm when everyone else loses control." Later that day, she received a call. It was the police department's internal affairs office. They wanted to speak with her in person. She agreed, setting an appointment for the afternoon. When she arrived, the officers she met were respectful and formal. They apologized for what had happened and assured her the situation was being reviewed. They explained that the 2 officers involved would undergo additional training, and that steps were being taken to improve how suspicious person calls were handled in the future. She listened carefully, her expression neutral. She didn't gloat or demand harsh punishment. She just wanted accountability. Before she left, she looked at the officer in charge and said softly, "Make sure you don't just write this off as a one-time mistake. This is a chance to change how things are done. Don't waste it." He nodded sincerely. "Understood, Agent, we won't." That evening, she returned home tired but calm. Her son was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. The story had spread even more by then. It wasn't just local news now. It had caught attention online, being shared on a few community pages with captions like "Mother of the Year" and "When Justice Shows Up in Real Life." When she walked in, he looked up. "Mom, people are calling you a hero." She laughed softly. "A hero? Hardly. I just did what any parent would do if they had the tools to do it." Yeah, but not everyone's mom works for the government, he said with a grin. She smiled. True, but even if I didn't, I would have still shown up. That's what matters. They spent that evening talking, not about fear, not about anger, but about lessons. She explained to him how people's perceptions can shape their actions. How sometimes, unfairness comes not from rules but from habits people never question. You can't control how people see you, she said. But you can control how you carry yourself. Never let anyone make you believe you're less than who you are. He listened quietly, taking in every word. It was one of those conversations he knew he'd remember for the rest of his life. Days passed and the tension began to fade. The department reached out again, confirming that the incident report would be corrected to show that the teen had done nothing wrong. They also issued an internal apology in writing. His mother kept a copy of that letter in a folder, not as revenge but as proof that truth still mattered. One weekend they went out for a drive just to get some air. The city looked calm, the streets busy with weekend life. They stopped at the same convenience store he had gone to that day. For a moment he hesitated before getting out of the car. She noticed. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "It just feels strange coming back here." She smiled gently. "Then let's make a new memory out of it." They went inside, bought snacks, and chatted with the store owner, who recognized them from the video but didn't bring it up directly. As they walked out, she said quietly, "See? The world keeps moving. You just have to keep walking through it." He nodded, feeling lighter than before. Later that night, he sat in his room writing something on a piece of paper. It wasn't for school or anyone else. It was just for himself, a letter he might never send. In it, he wrote about fear, respect, and what it means to be seen for who you are. He wrote about his mother's strength, about how her calm had changed everything, and how he wanted to carry that same strength into his own life. When he was done, he folded the paper neatly and put it in his drawer. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, the two officers involved sat in a training session. They watched the footage of the incident from their own body cams. Seeing it from that perspective made something click. They realized how quickly their assumptions had shaped their behavior. For the first time, they saw what it looked like, how unfair it felt, how much fear it caused. Neither said much, but both knew it had changed them. Back at home, life slowly returned to normal. The mother continued her work quietly, never talking about the incident unless someone asked directly. She didn't like the spotlight. She cared more about the message it carried. Her son went back to school, and though people whispered or stared at first, things eventually settled down. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to her and said, "You know, I used to think you had a boring job. Now I think it's the coolest thing ever." She laughed softly. "It's not as exciting as you think," she said. "Most days are just paperwork and long meetings." "Yeah, but when something matters," he said, "you make it count." Her smile softened. "That's what everyone should do," she replied. "You don't have to be an agent or wear a badge to make a difference. You just have to be willing to stand up for what's right when it matters most." As the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat quietly for a while, the sky turning a deep shade of gold and purple. The air felt peaceful, full of quiet understanding. The teen finally spoke again. "You know, I think that day changed me," he said. "Not just because of what happened, but because of how you handled it. I want to be like that someday." She smiled, looking at him proudly. "You already are," she said softly. And with that, the story came full circle, not as a tale of anger or confrontation, but of courage, patience, and the kind of love that stands unshaken even in the hardest moments. The officers learned. The department changed. The community talked. But most importantly, a young boy learned that sometimes silence can speak louder than shouting, and calm strength can move mountains. The mother never told anyone more than what they already knew. She didn't need to. Her actions had said everything. And every time her son passed that same street afterward, he didn't remember the fear anymore. He remembered the moment his mother arrived, and how with nothing but her presence and her steady voice, she had turned fear into power and a bad moment into a lasting lesson about dignity and courage.